Bellamy.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise in support of this bill, and I won't say too much to repeat what so many people have said about the former minister, the member for Salisbury, and indeed the current minister on the Treasury bench for their excellent work in bringing this bill to the House. I just wanted to bring up a couple of specific things that may not have come up as much as it might have done in this debate, which is, first of all, and the former Chancellor, the Right Honourable Member for Richmond, did mention this, the call-in power. And there has been some criticism in the press that may or may not have come from people within the regulators or indeed people speaking on their behalf, that somehow the call-in power from the government is somehow going to damage our regulatory system. It's somehow illegitimate for the elected government or indeed this House to, in extremis, if it feels that something is badly awry, to override the non-elected regulators on a specific area of financial regulation. I just want to put on record, I think that their concerns are, they may be well intentioned, but I think they are wrong. I think that it is critically important that this House and the elected government has the power on something that is so significant, i.e. financial regulation to a sector that is our jewel in the crown. It's a sector that employs millions of people, 2/3 of which are outside London. It's a sector that we all accept on all sides of the House that we should champion and work with. It is unconscionable almost that this power did not already exist. And so I think that we should stand firm if in the other place, or indeed in this place in committee, people wanted to reject that call-in power. I think it's of critical importance. Of course.
He speaks with a lot of expertise in this area. Can you give me, for instance, an example of when that power might be used, a set of circumstances where the government might want to do that?
So, lest anybody thinks that I have any particular specialist knowledge on this regard, I could imagine a scenario, and this is entirely, I repeat, on my own view, I can imagine a scenario whereby there was an intention supported by this House, indeed by the government that's supported by this House, for certain changes towards a regulation such as MiFID II. And the intention stated in, for example, a strategy document that may say the intention for this is that A, B, and C were to occur. But when the regulations are indeed drafted, that intention did not appear to come through in those regulations. I think in that sort of instance, it would be very legitimate for the House and the government to say, no, what we intend is the following, and we're going to change the detailed regulation in order to achieve the aim, the democratic aim, the aim supported by the government and this House that we seek to achieve. Now, there are a couple of other things that I think the government could have gone further in this bill, and I hope that in the coming weeks or indeed months we should consider. The first is the bank levy. Now, I know this is not always a popular thing to say, and, you know, in politics sometimes it's important to say unpopular things as well as it is to say popular things. When we are in an internationally competitive sector, if other jurisdictions that we are competing with for people, for capital, for institutions, for new investment, if their tax burden gets to a point where it is significantly, or indeed even a little bit, less than ours, and for other reasons people may find them attractive in other ways, we should consider maybe our tax burden that has risen over recent years, find ways to reduce it. The bank levy is one. It came during a time in the aftermath of the financial crisis, which is now quite a long time ago. I think it is really important that we consider getting rid of the bank levy to say Britain is still the leading centre of financial services for the world as much as we possibly can. I'm not, by the way, saying this is a panacea. No, far from it. That's why this bill has, 300 and something pages. There's a lot we've got to do. But the bank levy is a tax, and if we impose high taxes on internationally mobile capital or institutions, there may well be a penalty for this country in terms of attracting those institutions. And I'd ask the House to reflect on that point, and indeed the Treasury bench. The second point, is ring fencing. Now, the former Chancellor mentioned this. On ring fencing, when I was at HSBC, and I probably should have declared that at the beginning, I formerly worked at HSBC before I came to this House, and indeed in the City and other institutions. When I was at HSBC, I had the fortune to work for quite a long time on internal restructuring of the bank as part of a strategy, of which ring fencing was a huge part, because HSBC and Barclays were the two big British banks that had big consumer sort of retail bits and big investment banking bits. And even at that time, it was obvious to many of us that the most critical thing that we were doing in terms of ensuring the safety of those institutions, and indeed because they're so big, helping the safety of the whole financial services sector, was the recovery and resolution power, not just the ring-fencing aspect. And so I think that the review that's been done is very capable, very thorough. I would urge the Treasury to look a bit further and say, do we still need ring-fencing even under the terms of how it's been reviewed? Can we look again at the thresholds? Can we make this a less onerous thing for big institutions? Why? And I go back to the competitiveness point. If there are ways we can improve our competitiveness without compromising on safety, I think we should consider them. And with, of course.
I'd like the member to give way. Taking back to his earlier point about competitiveness and certain institutions perhaps being turned off investing or establishing themselves or removing themselves from the United Kingdom, where does he think the single largest threat for that comes from, if there is a turn-off?
I thank the right honourable gentleman. I would posit two particular jurisdictions. The first, and I think particularly the London Stock Exchange, which, lest the House doesn't fully appreciate it, the London Stock Exchange, in terms of the amount of capital that it has, in terms of capital raising, IPOs and various other things the London Stock Exchange does, if you go and look at it compared to even 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago, you've seen a dramatic fall-off. Amsterdam is doing very, very well, its stock exchange. I think that Amsterdam is a jurisdiction, though that will never rival London or the UK, I should say, because we have huge advantages and huge strengths. We need to consider that there is threat to the London Stock Exchange from there. And indeed, you have, so that's the first. And in the Middle East, there are various jurisdictions, some quite surprising ones, that are seeking to really, and particularly Dubai, but seeking to really try and make themselves attractive, particularly to capital from Asia, and indeed America, Asia, trying to make themselves a hub for some of that work. So again, this is something that they can't rival us, but you don't have to match us fully in order to damage our competitiveness. And I think that that's a very important point. Yes, of course.
Further to that, does the member think that those locations, especially perhaps the Middle East, that there may be an opportunity for, let's just say, funds arriving in those destinations that are not as scrutinised as they are here in the United Kingdom? Is that a potential threat to the banking sector?
So, I don't want to cast aspersions on any other jurisdiction. I think it is clear that we should be proud of our own high standards. And I know we will probably get to later on in this year, and we did earlier on in this session, about illicit money from Russia, for example. In this country, we take action, and we pride ourselves on the higher standards. It is not always the case everywhere. But that aspect of competitiveness is not a race to the bottom. And this is a really important point. You can be competitive and have high standards. We should not say the drive for competitiveness means you drop your standards, you end up with corruption and money laundering and all the rest of it. That just is not necessarily true. And in this country, we know we're proud of our institutions, we're proud of our sector, we're proud of our ecosystem, but that does not mean there aren't things we can do to improve. And I think that this bill is a very, very good example of containing a huge panoply of measures that will help strengthen our financial services sector. The last thing I will say is about mutual recognition agreements. Now, mutual recognition agreements are quite dry, technical things, but ultimately what they allow is for easing of doing business from one jurisdiction to another, from the UK to, for example, Switzerland, where we've had a huge very, very good building of relationship with that country. We should do much more of it, but we should work with the Trade Department to make sure that our trade deals do include much more in terms of services provision, not just mutual recognition agreements separate from that. Our trade deals, services trade will benefit this country pretty much more than any other country in the entire world. We need to work with our trade department, work with the Foreign Office, work with all our international ambassadors to achieve that aim.